everyone. My name is Sarah Lynne Bowman from the Transformative Play Initiative at the Department of Game Design at Uppsala University. This is part 5 of our 5-part series on safety and role-playing games. And today we're going to be discussing some general strategies for cultivating healthier and safer communities. Okay. So we've gone through before, during, and after, and here's just some overall strategies for building community. And some of these we have spoken of before, but we'll go in a little bit more detail. So the first is your presence in the community. So conscious moderating of specific player spaces and explicitly not others. So saying, this is the space I will moderate. This is not the space I moderate. So again, official forums, websites, discords, blogs, that sort of thing. And one thing to note is that your code of conduct should also probably cover officially moderated spaces. And this means that it's not just at the event itself that the code of conduct extends to, it's also to what happens in the Facebook group for your LARP or for your tabletop game. So this may also extend to unofficial spaces, such as harassment on social media. And so again, having that flexibility worked into the code of conduct to be able to take action on those kinds of situations can be really helpful. There are game runners who say, well, if it didn't happen on my watch, then it doesn't matter. Meaning that if it didn't happen at my game, then I'm not going to take action because it's not my business. And then there are others that are more concerned with the general health of the community and behaviors within the community. But the important thing here is to have clear and transparent communication about your ambitions for safety and for community, and also the limitations. I mean, what you can actually provide and what you can't. Don't overpromise. And then it's important to place compassionate, inclusive values at the center of all communication. I mean, this is a value I have, at least. I think that tends to make for a better community, and it is good modeling for others. So again, designer values, you can write those down as part of your design document. You can communicate them clearly to the players from the start. And then there's the code of conduct. Again, it can include guidelines for encouraged behavior. It could even be a document that players actively accept and even sign. And this, it's kind of like terms and agreements whenever you're getting an app or something like that. Ostensibly, you really want them to actually read the code of conduct, but having them sign it at least is a physical action that says, I've been exposed to this material. It's also important with your codes of conduct to be open to change based on feedback and also iteration and experience as games unfold over time or gaming groups unfold over time. So sometimes certain things may need to be altered. And again, breaching the code of conduct needs to lead to actual consequences. So these consequences need to be seen as just and fair. Of course, not everybody's going to view consequences in the same way, but you can do your best. There will always be pushback. That's just the nature of setting a boundary, particularly when it comes to participating in a community that people really, really love. And consequences need to be communicated clearly, meaning that there shouldn't be any ambiguity about what the consequences are. You can educate your players. You can provide tips and tricks about role-playing in general. You can teach them key terms that will give them the tools to talk about their experiences. I find this to be really important. So discussing bleed, discussing alibi, discussing steering, a lot of these terms we've been talking about in this discussion, consent, calibration, giving them vocabulary. And again, this education can reinforce the values of the game, inclusivity, and pro-social behavior. It's also possible to create a facilitator school or other training opportunities for members of the team. And that could be just a game master running a game, or it could be, dozens of logistics people in a large scale LARP. So again, educating people in pro-social and inclusive ways to run games, making sure people understand the power dynamics and imbalances that can occur when they're in a position of status, teaching how to spotlight each player equally, so to give center stage at different times when possible. And sometimes you can actually obtain certificates. So for example, getting people on your safety team to take a mental health first aid class and get a certificate for that is recommended. And again, safety teams should include trained members from diverse backgrounds, including marginalized groups when possible. That is because sometimes it's more comfortable for people to come up to somebody who shares an identity that they share, and not everybody might share that identity. And members within safety teams have various levels of responsibility, and it should be clear who's in charge of what. So sometimes they uphold the code of conduct, sometimes they monitor play activities, they may actually be the one receiving a report from a player. They may be the one addressing conflicts as they erupt in real time. People on the safety team often are helping players in states of crisis, overwhelm, or bleed. So people in LARPs, for example, if they've been playing for a couple of days and they're really tired and overwhelmed and emotional, they may just really need somebody to talk to. And that's often the role of the safety team member. And sometimes the safety team member can help them process something enough to get them back into play. Sometimes they may need to be taken off game for a while, and either is perfectly fine. Safety teams should be prepared to meet to discuss the details of reports if that's their role, and actually decide on action. It may only be 1 or 2 people or 3 on your safety team that actually enact consequences and decide on actions, whereas you may have several other safety team members that have other roles. And then again, enacting those consequences or setting boundaries. Then finally, I wanted to talk a little bit about cultural sensitivity. Diversity in the team should be transparent and foregrounded, meaning that you should always be trying to make clear that this is something that you value and that you have focused on in terms of the makeup of your group. It's a good idea to hire cultural consultants and make recommended changes when dealing with sensitive themes. This is a really big deal and something that is being talked about a lot right now. When we say hire, we don't mean ask for volunteer labor. Actually paying people to be cultural consultants and asking them what changes should be made, and then actually implementing those changes as much as possible. Sometimes people will hire a cultural consultant just at the end of a design process to get an okay, this person says it's fine. That's often not advised. It's best to do it early and often throughout the process. And also obviously to listen to what the consultants actually say. And then in general, just working towards diversity, equity, and inclusion and cross-cultural competency for employees, for players. And when I say employees, this could be that you're running a specific professional game, or it could be a volunteer organization. But either way, being able to offer opportunities for DEI and competencies like this to be trained is really helpful. So how can role players maximize the potential for transformation? As we've been discussing, role-playing games can be transformative, especially when players perceive themselves as safe. So transformation should emphasize choosing to change or learning how to navigate a change that is inevitable. This is really important with regard to safety. If people feel like they're being forced into something, then oftentimes they'll either just resist it or they'll really resent or even be harmed by that. So it should feel like a choice. There are some situations that people don't get to choose. And so learning how to navigate a change that is inevitable is also a really helpful thing that can be quite transformative. And the example that we like to use is death. Death is inevitable, but sometimes through play, we can actually process our fear of dying. We can process our fear of losing other people. We can even process the emotions of someone who we've lost already in our lives through bleed. So sometimes change is inevitable, but we're learning how to navigate it through these games. Ultimately, we should be able to choose the degree to which we face our own points of resistance. So undergoing a process of transition or transformation should always be consensual. We may not always be aware of the processes of transformation as they are happening within us. For example, we may unconsciously be bringing in the grief of a lost relative into a game and not even realize it's there. And all of a sudden it becomes a central part of the role-playing experience. But we should be able to calibrate with others and self-advocate as needed. So once we come into awareness of that, maybe realizing, wow, this content is too much for me. Can we back away from it? Or I'd prefer if we handled it in this way. So a healthy role-playing community fosters safety, calibration, communication, and self-advocacy. And also we believe a healthy role-playing community discourages peer pressure on people to push past their boundaries and instead invites them to explore their edges for growth. So a lot of us have sort of ways in which we've created a safe space for ourselves within our identity, and that's great. But there may be these little areas, these little edges for growth, where if we are encouraged and invited to step into them, which is what role-playing games often do, there's a lot of really wonderful things that can happen. That is very different than peer pressuring someone to push past their boundaries, because they're literally pushing past a place where they can feel comfortable engaging. And that will often have a negative effect on any kind of transformational impact that could have happened. So it's really important for us to figure out how to navigate this line with each other. So some takeaways: life is not safe, but role-playing games can be made safer. And we can establish practices before, during, and after play for communication and care. We can emphasize the importance of safety as a value in this community. And we can give players tools for consent and calibration whenever possible. And here are just some sources that I've integrated here. There's a lot of great work out there that I highly recommend, but this should give you a good starting point. And you can also, of course, check out the references that they cite to find other articles. Again, I'm Sarah Lynne Bowman from Uppsala University's Department of Game Design. I'm part of the Transformative Play Initiative. And thank you so much for your time and attention. And that was our final video on safety in role-playing games. We hope that you enjoyed this series, and I really appreciate your attention in this important and difficult topic. Thank you.